So when I was in my mid-20s, I played in a jam band called Grand Vision Channel. And after several months of rehearsing and playing shows, we decided to record an album. And I was the technology expert in that band. So I was basically tasked with making it happen. All right, it's time for you to record our debut album. So in the end, I recorded an 11-song album, about 40 minutes of music. But the project took me about a year to complete. So that was like a full year of effort towards getting this album to where I wasn't embarrassed about it, that it was something that I could stand behind. And getting good takes and mixing, I estimate, took about 20% of that time. Most of the rest of the time was spent performing miracle edits, right? Just editing the tracks into submission. I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure about the numbers, but it seemed that most of my time was spent editing. A lot of the time was spent editing. So my experience of editing or fixing the mistakes on this album was like pulling weeds from a garden. Every time I'd eliminate one, I would just notice another one. Like, oh no, here's another. I pay special scrutiny to this part of the song, and the next thing you know, I've seen 3 other mistakes. So I would observe things like the intro guitar came in wrong, or the vocals during the verse were out of tune. The snare fill, the bridge was offbeat. The bass guitar peaked during the second chorus. Right, so a bad take. I should have noticed. What am I going to do now? The outro guitar solo had phase issues. The keyboard part didn't match. The rhythm, the harmonies were wrong, and many other imperfections and sins and deformities that, taken together, bedeviled the entire project. It wasn't ready for release. I wasn't going to release something like this with all these goofy issues. So anyways, I attempted to tackle these editing problems with, maniacal devotion that bordered on stupidity. So instead of returning to the basic tracking portion of the recording, I just attempted to fix everything. What I should have done was just gotten better takes from my bandmates. But here's the thing: when you play with others, is your opinion isn't always the final one. So I didn't do this. Instead, I just set about editing everything, because my recalcitrant band members were of the opinion that I should it's fine, and let's just mix it and be done with it. Let's move on to something else. But, I didn't take their advice. I wanted to make it something as good as I can make. So I manifested the spirit of the 2001 hit song by Ben Folds, Rockin' the Suburbs. And he's got this comedic line at the end of the chorus in which he, take the checks and face the facts that some producer with computers fixes all my shitty tracks, right? You could say that about a lot of pop musicians, right? That there's someone behind the scenes writing their songs and fixing their shitty tracks, right? So I had 11 shitty tracks to fix, and I just went about doing it, as hard as I could. Anyways, in the process of producing that album, I learned how to edit. That was the main outcome, was experience. We eventually went our different ways. The thing about playing in a band in your 20s is that everyone's got to be devoted to doing it. But what ends up happening is someone gets a job, somebody gets married, and somebody has a kid. There's not the unilateral devotion. So if you want to make it as a band, everyone's got to be committed to the professional success of the band. Usually that entails something like living in the same house together, rehearsing every day, everyone making an honest effort towards promoting the band, setting up shows, going to other people's shows, commenting on other people's social networks that are involved in the music scene. But, that's difficult to manage. And then, of course, being capable of going on a tour, touring the country and playing shows everywhere. But That just wasn't possible. I was ready to do it, but my band members were in different places. So, anyways, the band went its own way, and after this, I essentially tacked towards playing in like commercial cover bands. So instead of playing original music, it's not that I stopped entirely. And I was in several bands up until about 2013. That's when I stopped playing in original bands. But the difference is if you play in a cover band or a cover duo like I did, then you can make money. So the difference is when you're in an original band, the bar and venue owners require you to collect money at the door, and they don't pay you. Whereas if you're playing jazz standards, commercial music standards, then you're there providing a service, right? So it's different there. You should know the distinction. You know, I've played a million original band shows in which the only other audience members were the other band and their girlfriends. Whereas, you know, this weekend or this past Thursday through Saturday, I played 2 shows. I fulfilled my obligation to the venue owners. I got people up and dancing on the Saturday show. I got paid both times. So it's a net positive. I keep my own musical skills together. And here and there, I sort of intersperse an original song or two because I still have them. But that's different than what we were up to. So anyways, it's sort of a young man's game. It made sense back then, you know, when I was in my 20s, when I looked like that. Right. Hadn't had a professional haircut in some time. But at this point in my career, you know, I'm more focused on education and on commercial performance. Like when I go to perform, I need to be bringing money home. I'm not going to play like, check out my original songs, guys, and then no one's there. And, you know, it's not that it's impossible to make it that way. It's just been elusive for me. In any case, the purpose here is to teach you about editing. Okay, so in the course of any project, you'll discover that some sounds need to be deleted, some need to be moved, some will need to be pitch shifted. It might be out of tune, it might need to be adjusted. You'll need to splice some sounds with others. Some sounds will need time stretched. I remember having to do that frequently, like the organ and the guitar, they just weren't coinciding. Like somebody hit a chord and it came in earlier than the companion chord and didn't last as long. And I'm like, all right, why these chords have to last the same amount of time? So I would stretch one or shrink the other one and then move them into position. Just a million things like that. Okay, the point is to make sure that the listener is not distracted from the content of the song by the quality of the audio or the quality of the performances. So if you're listening to a song, say a friend of yours song, here's my newest song, would you check it out? And then 3 seconds in, you're just hearing like broken cymbal crashes and wrong notes. Then you're not going to listen to it anymore. Why would you spend any time listening to such music when there's so much good music to listen to? Right? You know, I got the world's musical output in my pocket for $10 a month. I can just listen to Spotify. There's like, you know, sky's the limit. So you need to make sure that the listener is not distracted by the quality of audio. And if the audio lacks coherence or is riddled with error, then they're just going to listen to something else. Just say that to yourself until you understand. So to ensure that the listener is not distracted by audio quality, you have to continue editing until the sound has reached commercial quality, which is to say as close to perfection as you can get. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the basic concepts of editing and the way we can do some of these edits with Studio One. Okay, editing with the DAW is quite like editing text with a word processor. So like a text editor, the sound editor allows you to cut, paste, copy, delete, insert. But unlike a word processor, you can also augment and diminish the temporal nature, temporal is time, of the content, like you're molding clay. Right? It's really counterintuitive until you see it in action. So you can delete, move, pitch shift, quantize. What does quantize mean? Yeah, to lock it to the tempo map. You set your bars and beats, right? It's 4/4, 120. You know, and then you set your quantize level to eighth note, say, and then, you know, you might have to quantize a drum part. Splice, fade in, composite, fade out. Okay, so these should be distinct in your mind from mixing. Like the process of this business, like we're turning up channels and we're adding effects, that's not editing. Right? This is a separate thing. This largely takes place in this domain, in the arranger, right? When you're cutting things up, like slice. When you're deleting things, goodbye, that kind of thing. That's editing. So that's what we are talking about. Okay. So you should proceed along a logical course of action. Identify each sound in the mix. If you were there for the recording process, you should know what everything is. But say you're just being dumped into some project. First step is you got to listen, analyze, identify what it is that you're hearing. You should recognize the overall goal of the track, right? Which usually entails something like finding a focus instrument and then using all of the other sounds to build a sound hierarchy so as to prop up and support that primary sound. What's the goal of the track? Is it supposed to be a pop song? Is it supposed to be some sort of art piece that doesn't have to adhere to things like a sound hierarchy? Is it musique concrète, which is to say some sort of soundscape? But for the most part, you're mixing pop songs or jazz songs which have a focus instrument. That's the typical goal. The goal is to connect with as many human beings as possible. Right? You want to have a club that excludes everyone but yourself, and you just get used to no one listening to you. To some degree, you have to adhere to the conventions of aesthetics that have been established through 50-some years of pop music at this point. And the establishment of those aesthetics are things like a good solid beat supporting a focus voice, usually, or variably a focus instrument. You should clarify the details of every sound so that they more perfectly collaborate with the sounds in the mix to help you achieve this goal. Ask yourself, is this helping? Do you want a more clearly understandable mix, or do you want to do a vanity project in which you're overdubbing a million things? Like, I want this harmony. I want 10,000 harmonies. I want 50 guitars. I want a wall of sound. Now, there might be a place for that, but the listener has little patience for that. Like, a little bit of clarity and simplicity goes a long way. And this begins by identifying all of the sounds in the mix and asking, is this actually contributing? And then, of course, number 5 here is what I didn't do, is then really what should happen is you need to re-record any sound that's not maintaining that standard of excellence, or just delete it. Try to let your ego go. Like, oh, I love that harmony I did. But then listen to it really. Is it good? Right? Or is that really good? Or like, these are difficult questions. It helps to have an extra set of ears. Okay, so once these decisions are made, you can move about the nuts and bolts of editing, especially if you don't always have the opportunity to re-record. Okay. Perhaps the most important consideration is where along a sound's envelope to apply an edit, specifically a slice, which is the precursor to most editing. So there are 3 places that make sense. Moments of silence are probably the best. But if you can't get into a moment of silence, then you can name just before transients. And then if you really must, you can go for 0 crossings. What the heck am I talking about? All right, let's see this rascal here. So let's make one of these tracks nice and big. So if you're going to splice this event, usually you'll have to turn snap off so that you can float free. So if I have snap on, then I am not free to go outside of the time grid. Now that does admit to some contextual exceptions based on your zoom level. But for the most part, when you want to get nice and clean to a 0 crossing or a moment of silence, just turn snap off and give yourself something like this. Now, if that's not possible, if you have something that's more perpetual sound, there's not always moments of silence interspersed with your music. This one's more steady, but even it has moments of silence. But say we were editing something like this envelope here, and that it was buttressed up against another similar envelope. You might want to get right before the transient. It's like it's close to where the silence ends to where the sound begins to initiate its attack portion of the envelope. Remember that a sound's life story is indicated by its envelope. Attack is its birth, right? The hit. And then there's a little bit of decay, and then it sustains for a while. And then eventually the sound will die with release. Attack, decay, sustain, release. So oftentimes if you're performing edits, especially temporal ones, say that you wanted to do something like, oh, this was a good chord hit, but maybe this one downstream here was bad news. So catching it as close to the transient or the beginning of the sound should allow you to do something like this quite simply. Like, all right, here's the sound. Now I can just, right, replace it here. Yeah, this was no good starting right there. Right, you can zoom in, and I'll probably zoom in even tighter. And I would take notice of precisely where the transient is. And then I can be fairly certain that that would be making sense. I discovered that I played it well one time, but poorly some other time. And then in order to do the cleanest edit, I found like the moment right before the transient. And then that was just a nice clean scoot. Okay, so now if you are unable to get before the transient or moments of silence, then your emergency move is 0 crossings. Look at the sound wave here, the alto sax sound wave. And say I had to perform an edit here. Now your best bet is to get at a 0 crossing, right? Rarefaction, compression, rarefaction, compression. Anytime the sound is at 0, that means equal sound pressure or silence. So there's like a microsecond. So what you want to do is get something like this, 0 crossing. What you do not want to do is center envelope edits. You're going to hear, it's not quite a clipping, it's just a little, like a little tick. Like that, yeah, and sometimes, and oddly enough, it's usually too loud. All right. It's not that it's impossible to correct a center envelope edit. It's just that it's less than ideal. Go for 0 crossings, but that's even beyond what you should be going for. You should be going for clean moments of silence, or you should be going for immediately before the transient. Yeah, especially if you're editing drums, the most coherent thing to do is to catch, like, all right, where's this guy spring into life right there, right before the transient. Yeah, transients, moments of silence, or 0 crossings. It's important. Okay, one of the most common edits that you will perform is a crossfade, which is a manner of making the DAW perform something like this. So say we got these two sounds, channel 11 and channel 12. Say channel 11 is moving along perfectly fine, but then that take goes bad. You need to simultaneously move that fader down while this fader is being moved up. That's what a crossfade is. It looks like this. It's what DJs do, right? That's crossfade. Okay, so it turns out that you can do a crossfade from envelope to envelope if you're trying to marry two pieces of audio. So let's take this cut that I just did right here. So say that I needed to make this cut because I needed to perform something like this. I needed this to go this way. I needed to do a temporal edit. Well, what I might end up doing is maybe trying to get these two sounds to lean up against each other as accurately as I could. And then you highlight both, and you press X. And look what it just made right there. Crossfade. So that means if you do have some of those center envelope noises, you might be able to get the two sounds very close together and do this crossfade. I'm pretty sure something like that is on offer with every DAW. I remember doing them in Cubase. I remember doing them in Pro Tools. Yeah. Yep. Yes, here's how to do it technically. So first of all, you need to have two events, right? So say you have something like this. Now you highlight both. See what I did? I'm holding shift so that they both become highlighted. And then you press X. X for crossfade. I think there's probably also a right click, maybe operation specific to audio events. Yeah, did you see it? Oh, create. There it is. And then, but look what the keyboard command was. It's almost like, dude, you should just use this next time. Right. Incidentally, every DAW should have something like this. If you go into general keyboard shortcuts, and then if you're like, man, I wish I knew how to do a crossfade. Right. It's like create crossfade. There it is, X. Oh, look, remove crossfade. I didn't know that. Oh, you can set that. You can enter, let's do like Shift L or something. Oh, of course, it's already taken. That's what happens. Like you could set something, but there will be like there's so many keyboard shortcuts already preset. Let's see, how about just a fade? Fade into cursor. That's cool. No keyboard command yet for it. Create auto fade up X. I wonder what that does. All right, we're learning stuff. Let's do this. What was it? Up X? The hell? That doesn't make any sense. Shift. Okay, that's Shift X. Yeah, I missed some critical detail there. In any case, crossfades are simple. Not sure what happens if they're separate. You can still do a crossfade. It'll just fade each one out a little bit. Yeah, and then you can do something like that, but that's not quite the same as a crossfade. I would call that a fade out and fade back in. Crossfade usually requires intersections. This, right? So I mean that's like a messy way to do a crossfade, but probably still be fine. You can make them as deep or shallow as possible, but if you get them this deep, what is that? 2 measures. You're going to hear like a measure of fade out and then a measure of fade in, right? That's going to be less than ideal. So a wiser choice would be something like, just like a quick, that takes a beat to, one's going up while the other one's going down. The listener shouldn't be able to detect. Very common move. Okay, I've already made this point here, and then that is transient edits. You might want to make sure that you're making your cuts on downbeats. So I often find myself doing this. So say, all right, let's find a track that I haven't completely disfigured yet. I think that's this mic.